Welcome back to another live stream. So today we are doing much like it wasn't yesterday that we did another one of these, was it? Was it the day before? Anyway, it's another antinatalist video reacting stream. So I'm sure you all know the deal by now. I hope everyone's doing well. If you are here, then please say hello in the chat. It'd be nice to know who's here. I already see Transhumanist, Louis, and Antinatalism are already here. So welcome all of you guys to the stream. Or actually, I don't know if you're here because you messaged before it started, but thank you for messaging before it started. So, hey, Jesse's here. Or Jess. I'm not sure how you'd pronounce that. But anyway, welcome to the chat. And the Realist Rantman as well. Welcome to the chat. And Realist Rantman says, what's up? I became an antinatalist months ago and have never looked back. Amazing, very cool. Welcome to the live stream. And also, what was it like? Can you give us a bit of like information? What was it that, how did you hear about the idea? What was it that like convinced you or changed you? Yeah, let us know because that'd be interesting to hear. But yeah, I hope everyone else is doing well. If there's anyone else watching, which I know there are, there's 11 people at the moment, please say hello in the chat. So I haven't really got any intro to do for this one because we did one of these, I think it was 2 days ago maybe. And I went over a few like, you know, little updates and things then. I do have another update which will hopefully be coming in like the next couple of weeks, but it's not ready yet. But yeah, you'll find out about that in due course. Hey, Anna's in the chat and John as well. Welcome, John and Anna. Anna says, hello, everybody. 3 days in a row of content. You're on fire, Lawrence. I'm chronically on YouTube, so I'm loving it. Honestly, you're not the only one. I'm chronically on YouTube, but actually, I don't know if it would surprise anyone or whatever, but like I am like on YouTube quite a lot because I use it as my main source of like keeping up to date with the news and stuff like that, and also just exploring ideas. So most of the stuff I watch on YouTube is actually not really antinatalist stuff. Like I keep up to date with antinatalist stuff and watch it, but that's actually not the majority of the stuff I watch. The majority of the stuff, I'd say probably the majority, I don't watch any vegan stuff anymore, to be honest, like very occasionally, just because, you know, unless there's something like big happened or something like that, you know, it's just like, it's not new to me anymore. Most of the stuff I watch is like debates or like current affairs stuff. I keep up to date with like UK politics and stuff like that. Not like incessantly, you know, I wouldn't be able to reel off a thing about every single thing that's going off in UK politics, but I try to keep like up to date and also global politics as well, I guess. Anyway, you didn't come here to hear about my YouTube habits. But anyway, Anna, I'm glad that I can serve. Yeah, so it must have been Saturday then that we did the last one of these streams. And then, yeah, yesterday was the Leaner Norms video, which I was a bit more sort of like in your face in that one. Usually I'm a lot more, well, I think I was pretty much like calm in that one, but like usually I'm a lot calmer, less like, I don't really know, but I felt like I was maybe giving it a bit more like oomph in that one. And then at the end, I used that sort of like contrast, which I wasn't sure like, oh, will this land well or not? Is that a bit too sort of like, I don't know. But you know, yeah, and then we've got this today as well. Is, to be honest, the reason is because it may not come across on your end, but like I kind of felt like I hadn't really done any YouTube stuff for a while, which may be confusing for anyone watching this because a lot of the time I will go through periods of being quite productive and I'll record a bunch of stuff and then schedule it ahead of time. So to you, it can look regular. But to me, I will go through periods where I actually haven't, when I say periods, I mean like a couple of weeks or something, where I haven't really done anything significant YouTube related. And then I'm like, okay, I need to do some more stuff. Not because it's like, I feel like it's, you know, it's not like a chore or anything. It's just like, oh, I need to get back into that, you know. I like exploring the ideas, like doing the research for the videos and stuff, and creating them, and then seeing what people think about them. But anyway, we've already got from Bovine, not Secretions this time, but Bovine Blue Stocking, already got a super chat. So I want to say thank you so much to Bovine. And are we about to get the guy?
We bring children
Yeah,
in
here
this
we
world,
go.
and we raise them to be warriors against evil.
Here we go. The child soldier guy. Anyway, so I completely lost where I was. He always throws me off. Yeah, so yeah, thank you so much, Bovine, for the support, but also like the the ongoing support, because you donated last time as well. So thank you so much. It all goes to helping stuff here, and yes, there's potentially stuff coming up which is gonna require some costs. So yeah, any support people can give, that would be amazing. So Bovine Blue Stocking says, hello everybody, looking forward to this. Lawrence, please don't call me Bovine Secretions. I made that joke even before I'd read this. Triggering. Okay, my bad. Okay, I'll have to really get used to Blue Stocking then. I don't know why I came up with that one last time. But thank you so much for the support. Also, Cami is in the chat, and also Tyler Johnson as well. So welcome both to the chat. And the Realist Rant Man, who said that they became Antinatalist a few months ago, and then I asked them, a bit more info about that. Welcome to the chat, Kodak, as well. Also, Kodak, I saw you the first to comment on the Leaner Norms video, so congratulations on that. So that, yeah, they say, I got convinced by finding you, Mr. Antinatalist, and Steve Brown, looking at what antinatalism was made sense. You can't have suffering if you don't create the potential for it in the first place. Well, first of all, I'm honored to be one of the people that you came across antinatalism via. So it shows that this, is worth it. And the other thing I was going to say was, yeah, exactly. Like, I just feel like I guess it's a bit of a sort of like twist on the asymmetry or whatever, but talking about like the potential for things, like I just don't see any reason why we would need to create the potential for like positive things, in the form of creating someone who didn't exist, because it's like, there was no one to need the potential for any of that. There was nothing in my eyes, and I need to find a like a better way of like putting this together or whatever, but like there seems to be nothing to me compelling me to do that. Like there's no one there that I can point to that would stand to benefit. But on the flip side, it's weird, because it's like, even though there's no one who exists to point to benefit, on the flip side, it still seems awful to create the potential for suffering, even though there's no one there at that point in time to say, this is the person I'm sparing from suffering. The idea of creating potential for suffering, like, why would you do that? Just that seems like a massive dick move, if you get what I mean. Welcome, Richard, to the chat. And cool. Okay. Yeah. If anyone else is watching, hasn't said hello in the chat, please do. But anyway, so you might have guessed which videos we're reacting to today, because I've started to like put them in the thumbnails. So I've got 4 lined up. I'm hoping we're going to get through them all. This first one I was actually intending to do in the last one, but the last one just, it got too long, and this is like a 15-minute video, so that would have made it even longer. So yeah, so let's go on to that. So this first one there's a tiny bit of like background to this, like only a tiny bit. And I won't know all the full details, but basically you'll see that I'm starting it a minute and a half in, just because like there's some, it's not really into the substance of the video by that point. But basically there are these people who do like street epistemology, where basically what they do is they go out onto the street and they basically engage people in conversation, I guess often in like philosophical conversation, but I guess it can really be about like anything. But basically, it is getting people to it's engaging people and essentially getting them to question why they believe what they believe. So there's this guy, Anthony, I don't know how to say his second name, and he has a YouTube channel and does loads of this, and this is one of his videos. And he's obviously on some sort of, I don't know if this is like a university campus or something. I mean, it seems pretty dead for a university campus. But anyway, he is speaking to this woman who it may not come across at the point I'm starting it, but basically, she's clearly spoken to him like a few times because when she walks up to him, they clearly have some sort of rapport already, and she references the fact that they might have even spoken to each other like 5 times or something, and they've done a range of topics. And this time she comes up and she wants to talk about antinatalism. So I don't know if she's an antinatalist or if she's just heard this idea, she's putting it forward, and she wants to like explore it with him because she thinks he'll be a good person to like bounce that idea off and see if she does believe in it or not. But anyway, so yeah, that's this video. So we'll watch this one, then there's a few after we're going to get into, but let's watch this one first. Now, when I got this up beforehand, the volume was slightly quiet. So what I've done is I'm actually going to turn my volume down a bit. And so in relation to this video, so if you turn your volume up, it should be balanced and okay. Cool. So let's get stuck in. I don't think there's anyone else new in the chat to say hello to. But yeah, if you join, please come say hello. And cool. And if anyone sends any questions in the chat or anything like that, I will try and see them and get to them. If you want to guarantee that I see something, then you can send in a super chat like Bovine, or there's also a Streamlabs link as well, which then comes through a back end to me. But yeah, anyway, let's continue.
Let's see.
I have a claim that I want to test.
Okay.
Oh, and straight away, I've got it on 2x speed, so let's put that down.
Go for it.
My claim is that I think it is unethical to have children because children or babies never give consent to being born.
Okay.
Right, so she's going with the consent. Linda's in the chat as well. Welcome, Linda. Right, so she's going with the consent argument. That's interesting. I wonder if, because this guy, Anthony, pretty sure his name's Anthony, because he does loads of this stuff like street epistemology and he's probably spoken to thousands and thousands of people. It'd be interesting to know if he's actually come across this idea before. He must have at least heard of it, but I wonder if he's had like, you know, any sort of substantial engagement with this idea before. So I guess we'll find out over the course of the video.
And so willingly having a child is unethical because you are putting your desire, or you're forcing your desires onto someone else without their consent.
Huh. Is this natalist? Is this natalism?
Antinatalism.
Antinatalism.
Okay, so maybe he's not that familiar then. Cool. And hopefully the volume is okay. If the volume is not okay, I can turn my voice slightly lower down so you can increase your guys' volume. But this is basically how it's going to be.
Okay. Is this a view that you wish your parents had had?
I think so. Sometimes. But yeah, I think I've questioned that a couple of times, and sometimes I would say yes, sometimes I would say no. But
that's an interesting first question to ask, right? Like, to be honest, I mean, it's interesting, but also it's like, I was going to say it's interesting and it's not interesting at the same time. But like, it's a weird one because, you know, the idiotic way to approach that would, and you get a lot of people say this, were like, well, if your parents, you know, or they'd even make a joke out of it of like, you know, oh, I wish your parents, you know, had thought this way, then, you know, an idiot wouldn't have been born. Or they may say, you know, oh, well, if your parents, you know, thought this way, then you wouldn't exist to have this conversation with me. And also, while I'm talking, I'm actually going to move I'm actually going to move myself to the other side of the screen because I'm blocking her, the view of her. So yeah, that's like a very, I don't know if I'd say very common, but it's like a thing that antinatalists hear, right? But he's like framed it as a question because he's curious, or well, obviously he's a curious guy because he does this as a YouTube channel. So yeah, at least he's like put it in a more sort of curious way rather than it being something to like, because a lot of people basically use it as a way to mock someone who thinks this way. But yeah, so that's kind of cool. But anyway, let's continue.
There's nothing I can do about it here. But me personally, I wouldn't want to have children force my wishes onto someone else.
What do you think about adoption?
I have a positive stance towards adoption.
Would you adopt 2 children
Like me personally,
instead of actually having them naturally?
I would prefer to adopt children over having them naturally. Me personally, I don't want to adopt because I don't think I'd be a good mom. I don't want to be a mom.
Do you think that you would be forcing your will on adopted children?
So that's an interesting one because I think that it's very complicated. So the adoption in practice is sorry, there was some weird noise outside. Yeah, adoption in practice can be very messy and all of this sort of stuff. So I'm going to talk in a more sort of abstract, idealized way. But if, like, in adoption, someone could claim that you're imposing your will on someone, right? But it seems fundamentally different to the imposition of will by creating someone, because the adoption of someone is done to a child who they already exist, right? And since they already exist and that they're a child, they're in a vulnerable position, they're in need of a guardian, a caretaker, right? Now, at the moment, the state, or the people who are employed by the state, however you want to phrase it, are filling that caretaker, that guardianship role. Or some private citizen is fostering them at that point in time, right? But this isn't generally seen as like an adequate form of caretaking, because it can be very unstable for the child. They won't get as much attention because, you know, if you're in the system, as it's called, then you're around a lot of other children who are going to have their own issues, because, you know, a lot of the children in the foster system will have very complicated situations and histories. And so a lot of the caretakers are going to be, their time is going to be absorbed by many other children around, them having to look after. So obviously that's not like an adequate situation. I mean, maybe someone could say none of these things are going to ever be adequate situations, but in an idealized case, it's going to be better for the child to be adopted to by suitable parents, right? By like suitable adoptive parents. And this is because they will their situation will be more constant, presumably from that point on. You know, there'll be more attention paid to them. But yeah, more attention paid to them, but specifically by like and there will be continuity in the people who are paying attention to them. Generally, they'll have more resources available to them because they'll be adopted by people who are just taking care of them, or maybe one or two other children. Whereas if they're in the system, there's many children having to compete for the resources in that system. So, and in general, being adopted will be in the interest of the child for the reasons I've just said, right? So now, someone can say, oh, well, you know, by adopting, you're imposing your will on a child. And I'm assuming they're saying that because your will is that you have a desire to raise a child and you want to adopt, right? And so you're essentially using that child as a means to fulfill your need or desire of wanting to raise someone. And you can be that cynical, you know, it's fine to recognize that part. You know, most people who adopt do it, one, because they do want to help someone, but it is also because they want to adopt, right? Like I can't think that there would be at least a majority of adoptive parents who adopt knowing or not like wanting to raise children, right? So yeah, so it is obviously fulfilling some sort of desire they have. And if someone wants to call that like imposing their will, then they can call that imposing their will. But I would just say, like, in that case, it doesn't seem like a bad imposition of will. If anything, you would want, like, if you're framing it as an imposition of will, you kind of want an imposition of will in that case, right? Because you wouldn't want the child to be adopted by parents who don't want to do that, right? So it's like, it's almost the fact that the parents having a desire to adopt a kid is probably better, right? Because they're going to be more motivated, more energetic, more fucking hell, what's it called? Engaged, all of this sort of stuff. So yeah, if you're going to be very uncharitable, you can call it an imposition of will. But I would just say, if you're understanding the landscape correctly and you're going to call it an imposition of will, then I would just say it's not a problematic imposition of will. I probably took way too long to explain that, but yeah, if anyone has any thoughts, then let me know in the chat. Cool. There's a few things going on in the chat, but I haven't really kept up. So, yeah, I'll get back to the video. Let's continue.
Forcing my will in the sense that these children want a parent? What do you mean? Like, they didn't... What do you mean by forcing my will on these children?
Forcing my will on somebody, I thought was the words that you used. I might be wrong, but that was the argument that I thought that you had about people naturally having children, that we shouldn't force our will on other people without their consent.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you are consistent when it comes to adopting children.
Right, but again, how is adopting someone imposing suffering on them? Like, I recognize there can be friction. When you adopt a child, there can be friction, particularly in the early stages, maybe. And again, I'm no expert on this, so I might be getting all of this wrong. But I would assume when a child is adopted, there is going to be some friction because they are getting initially used to that new environment. These are new people. You know, you're going to have to get used to them. There's going to be some friction, all this sort of stuff. And that friction will cause some suffering to the child. But in the long run, it's probably going to reduce the child's suffering, right? At least in the idealized case. Obviously, nothing's guaranteed. But it seems like changing that child's situation so that they're in an adoptive family is going to secure their long-term interest better than if they're in the foster system permanently, or until they're like 18, and then I assume when you're 18 then you sort of move out of the system. I don't fully understand it, but yeah, so I wouldn't like that's just like complete, because when you create someone, there's someone who literally didn't exist or want to come into existence. They had no needs or desire to be catered for. So that's different from adopting, because the child already exists and has needs and desires that need to be catered for. You're creating them only because you want to. You're adopting them only because you want to. Maybe it's not always only, but it probably usually is. So there is a similarity there. And in procreation, you're imposing suffering and death on them, right? In adoption, you're not doing that. I mean, okay, yes, like I said, there's maybe that initial friction, but in the long term, you're probably securing their interest better than in the alternate case. And obviously, you're not guaranteeing death for them. That death has already been guaranteed for them because they're already here. So yeah, I just don't see them as really analogous at all, but it'll be interesting to see if this goes anywhere.
Well, these children that are up for adoption, they've already been born, so they already had someone else's desires like put upon them.
Oh,
by
okay.
being born.
You're off the hook for adopting somebody because it was their natural parents that were the ones responsible for them being here.
For being born, yeah.
If you could push a button and get rid of every human, including yourself, would you do it?
So it's gone straight to the red button. Fucking hell. Now, I'm not going to go through it all here, but if people want to understand the difference between antinatalism and the red button thought experiment, I have a video specifically on this, and then I have a video that's a Freudian slip, that goes over the difference between antinatalism and extinctionism, which is kind of related to the whole red button thing. So what I'll do is, yeah, I was going to say I'll put the links in the chat, but that might just be more complicated. But anyway, yeah, I'll try and remember, and I'll put them in the link in the description for this live. But yeah, if anyone wants to just get them open in a tab now and watch them later, the red button one is called Why Antinatalists Should Stop Talking About the Red Button. And the extinction one is called The Relationship Between Antinatalism and Extinction. I think those are them. But anyway, they'll come up. So yeah, I'm not going to go into it now, but the question he's asking is essentially a misunderstanding of the claim she's making. If I'm putting it in the context of the discussion they're having now, she said that she doesn't want to impose suffering without consent. If she was to press a red button to end all the lives there, maybe he's asking like, oh, there's going to be no suffering. Well, suffering is a form of harm. If she sees death as a harm, then it's still imposing harm without consent. So I think he's kind of misunderstanding the point here. But if he's new to the subject, you can't really blame him. So let's continue.
Instantaneously. I wouldn't push this button and get rid of every human, because what I want isn't necessarily what everyone else wants. Just because I wish sometimes I hadn't been born doesn't mean that everyone else wishes that they hadn't been born.
Okay, so there could be other people who don't agree with your hypothesis and say, yeah, I didn't have a say in the matter, but I'm grateful to be here. I'm so glad that my parents did decide to have me,
Yeah, exactly.
even though I couldn't consent to that case. Okay, and that would be your reason for not just pushing the button.
Yeah, just because like me personally.
Yeah, well, once we're here, we have a will to continue existing, right? We have relationships we want to maintain, goals we want to strive for, and we just generally value our lives. And I see no issue with that, as long as you are fulfilling any negative duties you have. And I think it would be preferable if we at least spend some of the time we're here trying to improve the lot of others. But yeah, I don't see why there would, just because someone thinks that it's not, I mean, it's the classic starting lives, continuing lives, right? Like, just because someone thinks that the bar is not met to, like, basically, he's assuming, or I don't know if he is, but the way he's framing his questions and stuff is assuming that she maybe thinks that the bar that needs to be surpassed to start a life is the same as the bar that needs to be surpassed to continuing a life, which is not they're not the same, right? They're completely different situations. One doesn't have any pre-established needs or desires. The other one does. One you're making on the decision on behalf of someone else. The other one you're not, as in continuing your own life. Obviously, if it's the button, then obviously you are making a decision on behalf of other people. But yeah, oh, sorry about that. Let's continue.
I sometimes think that I wish I wasn't born. That doesn't mean that everyone else thinks the same way. Maybe like you said, oh, I'm grateful that I was born and I'm happy to be here. That doesn't mean that it's okay for me to push that button and have them magically disappear.
I'm hesitant to ask this question, but I'm also very interested in understanding if it's the case. Are you willing to push a button to not be here?
No, I don't think so. Not right now, no.
That's basically the answer I would have given. Like, no, not at the moment, but like situations change. Maybe, as I get older or this sort of stuff, or if my situation just changes and it's really shit all of a sudden for some reason, whatever, who knows what the context would be. But yeah, it's like once you exist, again, that you become attached to certain things, you enjoy certain things, and you want to pursue them. And that's completely fine. It's your life. Have at it, Hoss. All this sort of good stuff, right? And sometimes I think people misunderstand antinatalists when we say that, we don't want to impose suffering on someone else. They assume that we think that all life is like suffering. Maybe some antinatalists do think that, but like personally, I don't think all life is suffering. I completely understand the pessimistic evaluation of our lives and stuff, and I like heavily subscribe to that. But I don't think all life is just suffering. I think a lot of life is very bearable, can be pleasant, and and worth continuing. And I'm in that situation at the moment. Obviously, it may not continue for all of my life. That is why I advocate for the right to die. You know, there's a few reasons. Like, also just fundamentally, it doesn't seem to make sense to me if you own your own life, but you don't have the right secured by the state to be able to choose when and how it ends. That doesn't make sense to me, because it's like the argument against slavery was that we should own our own lives. But then it's like, well, if I own my own life, and on top of that, the fact that I didn't get to choose to start it, you know, then I should have if I own my own life, I should be able to control my own life with my, you know, have autonomy over it. And surely fundamentally that means that I should be able to realize its end, right? And in the manner it ends. That just seems like a fundamental thing to me, you know. But yeah.
I think it also depends on the mindset of the person. If this person is in a good place in their life, or if they're in a negative place in their life, their answer will change. But I think if you were to put this button in front of me right now, I wouldn't push it.
Okay. Interesting. That was great. Great talk.
Thank you.
I actually have something for people that come back for a fourth. I'm digging my bag for it.
Oh, right. Okay. Now this is like he's skipped to.
I don't think so.
Okay. It's a call-in place, or you can actually text with agents who are trained to talk to people who don't believe in any gods anymore that might be having difficulties.
Okay.
So
Is
that's not on there? No, but
is it on the
I'm kind of confused.
that
What
was
is
short
that?
and
Is
sweet.
this an
We can
ad?
keep going if you want.
I don't really have anything else to say. This is
Okay.
my opinion.
Okay. Are you comfortable? Because it seems like you're right in the sun. So here's what I'm wondering.
Okay.
Do you think you could ever reach a point in your life where you'd want to press the button?
I don't know what that bit was, so I just skipped over it. But anyway, so this question, yeah, I mean, there are some people who are, as David Pierce says, fanatical life lovers, and they will say, no, it must go on no matter the condition. But for me, like, it's very obvious to me that there are certain circumstances that I could be in where it would just clearly be better to end existence, right? Just like not continue to exist. I don't think that like life is inherently like valuable. Like I could get to a point where it's not valuable to me to continue existing. It would just be shit that, maybe an illness, society changes heavily for the worse or whatever, and just the average condition of people is just awful, and I'm one of those people. There's all sorts of reasons, I could just be like really fucking old and just like slowly losing my cognitive and physical capacities, and I don't want to get to the point where I lose them completely and then not be able to make autonomous decisions. So I might make the decision to opt to end my life before I get to that stage while I'm still, lucid and coherent. Yeah, there's many reasons you may want to do that. Let's see what she says.
I think if you had asked me in the past, like a few years in the past, I would have pressed that button. But if you had asked me now, I wouldn't press that button. I can't predict the future. I can't tell you if I would want to press that button in the future. But I don't foresee myself wanting to press that button.
Do you think having kids, whether you adopt them or have them naturally, would influence your desire to press the button for yourself in any way?
So I think for me it would, obviously. Like, if you choose to create someone or adopt someone, you've taken on obligations to someone else. And I think that adds a very significant layer onto, your existence. It adds a complication. You now have dependents that you've willingly taken on. It's not like it was imposed on you or anything. And if you have dependents who would be, they would be harmed by you've willingly taken on dependents who would be harmed by you ending your own life. I do think you have to significantly take that into account when you're considering ending your own life. I don't think it's like a hard and fast thing. I think there will be circumstances where someone... So, for example, I was watching a documentary a while ago, And there was this guy in, I think it was Belgium or the Netherlands. I can't remember which country. And it was a father, a mother, and I think a young, and maybe 2 children, and they were young children, right? So they'd had these kids. So they obviously, at least in my view, now have obligations to these children. But this father, you know, whether or not I disagree with his choice to create those children, and I recognize that he has obligations to those children that he should try his utmost to fulfill. This guy suffered from cluster headaches, and he was seeking the assisted dying, euthanasia, because they were just too bad, and he hadn't found anything that could help them. I know there's some research recently on, I think it's cannabis or psychedelics that can help with cluster headaches, but I'm not entirely sure about that. And I think this case was maybe a few years ago, before those things were sort of more in the limelight. And yeah, his life just seemed fucking awful. And honestly, I had sympathy for the guy. I was just like, look, he has created these children. I strongly disagree with that. And now that those children are here, I do think he has obligations to them, and he should try his utmost to meet those obligations. But there does come a point when the requirements or the burden put on you to meet those obligations is so severe, i.e. him continuing to exist so that he can fulfill those obligations, would be so painful and harmful to him, that I can understand, you know, not meeting those obligations. Also, it's complicated by the fact that in his circumstances, the cluster headaches, but it can also apply to other circumstances, like that can impair your ability to meet those obligations even if you continue to exist. So you may continue to exist and it be really shit and not even be able to meet those obligations because of the thing that's causing you to want to end your life in the first place. So I can sympathize with someone in a situation like that. Like, at the end of the day, you know, all the stuff I've already said, but also it's like, he also, you know, didn't choose to be put here. And I know he's perpetuated the cycle by having kids himself, which obviously and I'm assuming everyone watching is going to disagree with. But you know, that does in some way like hinder the ability to sympathize, because it's like, okay, well, you are a victim, but you've also become a victimizer. But he is also still a victim himself, especially the fact that he's got cluster headaches. And I just thought, like, you know, I can definitely see a strong case in that example where, you know, like, you've voluntarily taken on these obligations and you should meet them. And it would, you know, it would be bad if you didn't meet them, but I can kind of understand, like, your situation is so bad that, like, yeah. So I don't know, maybe I just rambled on for way too long there, but welcome to the chat, MJ, Sentient Soy Boy. Who else has joined the chat? Greenleaf, Wise Man, welcome back, Wise Man. Yeah. Anyway, I kind of rambled there, but we'll keep going.
Only for myself.
Yeah. If you had 3 children depending on you, would it influence your ability or your desire to press the button?
I would say it would make me more inclined not to press the button, just because these children are dependent on me.
Even though they may not have had any consent in their appearing here on this planet, the fact that they would be dependent on you could actually influence.
I think he's completely got that mixed around. I actually don't think that's either not relevant or it's relevant but in the opposite direction, right? The fact that they weren't able to consent to come here, right, it makes those obligations stronger if you're the person who's brought them here. Like, if they were somehow able to elect voluntarily to come into existence, which obviously doesn't make any sense because you'd have to exist to be able to do that, but imagine they could, right? And you were simply the one facilitating their own will, then I can recognize that even though you were the one to birth them, you wouldn't necessarily have as many obligations to them because they sort of willfully brought themselves here. They knew what was happening, blah, blah, blah. You just facilitated it. Given that you facilitated it, that probably would sort of levy some obligation to you, but not as strong as if the actual situation of you just create them and they did not exist to want to come into existence. So yeah, I actually think he's got it kind of the wrong way round, which makes me think he's not really fully understanding. But it's fair enough, this is an idea that many people have not heard about before. Maybe he's one of those people. So I get it.
Your decision and whether or not you'd want to not exist yourself. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, I think so. Because if I were gone, if I push that button and these 3 children that are dependent on me, they no longer have a caretaker. This is assuming I'm their only caretaker.
Even if you had a spouse helping out.
How would I feel?
Yeah. Let's say there's 2 of you and you have 3 kids. Would it? I mean, it's kind of a hard hypothetical. But I'm wondering, what influence do you think it would have on your consideration for ceasing to exist yourself?
I also wouldn't want to push that button and then leave all the workload on the spouse.
Okay.
It would make it harder on them.
You'd recognize that the other spouse would have to pick up the slack in order to raise the 3 kids. Okay.
If I wanted to push that button, I think I would first ask this spouse if they were okay with me pushing the button.
Oh, interesting. You'd solicit some input into your decision making about whether you should push it. If you were thinking about pushing it, you'd actually check with your spouse to get their input.
Right, because it's raising.
Welcome to the chat, Daniel.
These 3 children, between the spouse and I, it's a team effort. So it's not just about me anymore. It's about me, my spouse, and then these 3 children. These 3 children, they're dependent on me. And although my spouse might not be as dependent on me, assuming we're in a stable, happy fairy tale marriage, I mean, they would depend on me too. Maybe not in the same way as a kid would, but they would still be emotionally or financially dependent or reliant on me. And so me pushing that button would affect their life in a way that they may not want. They may not want to.
Oh, I see. You would still be foisting something on them without their consent, possibly, if you did decide to take yourself out.
Now, if I was okay with it, and say my spouse was okay with me pushing the button, and my kids, for some reason, they were okay with pushing the button, and I wanted to, then I don't see why not.
Is your decision whether or not to push the button on yourself contingent on the dependency that others around you may have on you?
I would say so, yeah. But then again, I would have to think about how dependent these other people are on me, how close they are to me. Now, if it's someone like a child or my spouse, then they are more dependent on me than a random stranger is.
Sure.
So if a random stranger would say, well, I depend on you, I would tell them, I barely know you.
And yet, one thing I'm noticing as my kids are getting older, I have a child that's getting ready to go off to college, their dependency on me is decreasing as they get older. So there was a period of time where they couldn't do anything without me. And then they figured out a way to get into their car seats and put their seatbelts on by themselves and maybe drive to school now by themselves. So, yeah, I guess this is what I'm wondering. Is your contemplation about hitting the button to end your own life dependent on other people being dependent on you?
It'll be partially dependent. I wouldn't say it would be fully dependent. Yeah, there are a range of considerations that you've got to take. You've got to take into account when you're potentially choosing to end your own life, right? Obviously your own interests, but also the interests of others. And it really, in some instances, it'll be your interests that. In fact, probably most instances it'll be your interests that supersede the interests of others, but there will be some instances where the interests of others supersede your interests, and one of those situations could be the raising of children. It would depend on the situation, obviously, and it's a complicated one. It's one of those things where you can't really generalize about. It's really a case by case thing. But yeah, I mean, to me, it's like it's kind of obvious that there are a range of considerations you'd need to make.
I would say yes.
Yeah, exactly. And Sentient Soy Boy says, I did like her answer of depends on how dependent, because you could argue the whole country is dependent on your labor, or yeah, exactly, some such nonsense. Yeah, exactly. And his example of how, like, you know, his kids used to be completely dependent on him, and now they're going away to, I think he said, college, and they're less dependent. So yeah, that would also change the variables, obviously. Like, if you have just had kids and they're 6 months old, you know, you're going to have stronger obligations to them than if you are, you know, 70 years old and your kids are now 30 years old, and it's like they've gone out, they're earning their own income, you know, maybe they've started a family of their own, they've got whole independent lives and stuff, right? Like, I still think you'd have some obligations to them because, you know, creating someone else, you're creating a whole life, so you do have obligations to them, in my view, for their whole life. But I accept that those obligations are going to decrease in how all-encompassing and intense, I don't think is the right word, but I'll use it anyway, they are. So that makes sense to me, and it makes sense what you're saying, Sentient Soy Boy.
It also depends on how dependent they are. If they're completely reliant on me, then be less inclined to push the button. If there are people that are not as dependent on me, or not dependent on me at all, then I don't think there'd be anything holding me back from pushing that button, aside from me wanting to push it or not.
Okay. Cool. Interesting. That's good. It's probably my favorite talk today.
Oh, nice.
And I had several. Christina, you got the brain.
I do have the brain.
Okay. You have any feedback for me? Do you want to ask me where I stand on your view? Anything at all?
Sure, where do you stand? You said you have kids. What do you think?
I think I have a knee-jerk reaction to just taking myself out of the mix because nobody's dependent on me. Although, if I was in a home, perhaps, and all my loved ones were gone, all my family and friends weren't around, and I was completely dependent on everything, technology and other people.
Oh, so you're the one dependent on other people and other things, like if you were in that situation?
I guess I'm putting myself... I think dependency actually might be a factor for me, whether I would decide to end my life.
This kind of turned into a conversation about death and the right to die, I guess, rather than antinatalism, which is kind of unfortunate, but oh well, it is what it is.
For not. So I think I'm on board with you a little bit there. However, we might quibble about who actually is dependent on us or not. Like, you may actually think nobody's dependent on you, but you very well may be surprised how dependent your loved ones are on you being around. However, for myself, I suppose, if I looked around and I wasn't dependent on anybody...
Or if you thought that you weren't dependent on anyone, your perception might be
Right.
different
Well,
from
that's
reality.
a good point. I might be misperceiving the situation, and there really are people tremendously dependent on me, and I could actually cause them harm if I did remove myself. So I'd have to have a really good beat on it. That, okay, yeah, there's really nobody here that's depending on... Nobody would notice if I was not here tomorrow.
Welcome to the chat, Pig Big Wig, what a name, and go vegan.
Then I think that probably would be a factor. However, as I stand here in front of you today, there's a lot of people that are dependent on me. And maybe that's what gives our lives worth and meaning. So when I hear somebody surface the anti-natalist viewpoint, it makes me wonder if there's other things below the surface that are driving the view.
I kind of get the impression, though, that he thinks that antinatalism is like anti-lifism. And it kind of is in a certain way. It's anti-starting it. But it's not anti-life in that once life is here, it should be ended as soon as possible, or ended at all, really. It doesn't really have an opinion on that. And given that he's now pivoting back to talking about antinatalism as a term, when he's just been talking almost exclusively about the ending of lives, kind of makes me think he's completely misunderstood what it is. Which, you know, how much can you say that's on him? Maybe it's kind of on her because she wasn't like constantly clarifying things to him. But yeah.
It could be. I don't really run into antinatalists that often. So.
I've only just recently heard their argument.
I've been involved, or I guess I've known of antinatalism for, I guess, maybe a few months, maybe a year or so.
Okay.
I heard about them on Reddit.
On Reddit.
Yeah, there's a community on Reddit.
Classic.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's wrap it up.
All right.
Thanks
Nice to see you again.
for your time.
Thank you.
We'll see you around.
See you.
Okay, bye.
Okay, boom. I think I did see at the end he maybe does a debrief.
Topic that I don't normally speak about. Definitely different. Things got deep there, didn't it? That was definitely different. And a topic that I don't normally speak about. I've only just recently started hearing people talking about this topic. I think somebody called in a couple times to Objectively Dan's show.
That's interesting. So I'll move myself around. But it's interesting he talks about Objectively Dan and Truth Wanted, because so Truth Wanted, as far as I can understand, is like an offshoot of the sort of atheist experience type thing. And there's this host on there called Objectively Dan. And he seems to be like, I don't think he's like balls deep antinatalist, but I think he's kind of like pretty sympathetic to it. And I think he even identifies as an antinatalist. Yeah, so that's an interesting one. And I think this guy has been on Truth Wanted as like a co-host sometimes. And it's interesting. So a few times I've done reactions to Truth Wanted when antinatalists have called in, because they've actually got quite a few clips. There's actually one clip that I've got in this playlist of reaction videos. So maybe we'll get to that. I don't think we'll get to it in this stream, but maybe another one. So yeah, it's interesting that he's heard about antinatalism through that.
Oh, Truth Wanted, which is on Fridays. I don't really know much about it. I never really prepared to talk about the conversation. This was kind of the natural flow of it. But I think it was really interesting that we discovered that her view on natalism may very well be dependent on the dependency that other people have on her.
Yeah, he's misunderstood what it is.
Wow.
Right, so... Okay, so it says, Christina and I worked out many of the details surrounding the release of this video and plan to explore the morality of antinatalism next.
So maybe it really wasn't so much about consent.
So maybe there's a second video. I'll have to try and find that. And maybe we can do it in a future stream.
Maybe that's a smokescreen for something deeper. I don't know. Damn.
Yeah, it's neither of those ones. So yeah, that was an interesting one. What did you guys think of that? Let me know in the chat. Yeah, it'd be interesting to know if he did do a follow-up with... I'm just looking in the description of the video to see if he links a second one. I don't see a second video. But he has linked some suicide prevention hotline. So yeah, he has completely misunderstood. No, that's not it. Cool. Okay, so yeah, I thought that was an interesting one. I think it was kind of unfortunate it turned into a non-antinatalist discussion. And he kind of clearly misunderstood what was being said. So yeah, are there any new people in the chat? I don't think so. Cool. So the next video I wanted to do was a clip of Peter Singer. So this is from ages ago. You can see he looks younger, although he's pretty old there. So someone asked him about antinatalism. I actually don't think I've ever seen this clip before. I've had it on my watch later for ages. And actually, I've actually asked Peter Singer a question kind of about antinatalism myself. So I can quickly tell that story. So basically, he rewrote Animal Liberation. It was called Animal Liberation Now. He did a global book tour about it. He had a date in London. I went to that, and I was able to go up and ask him a question, and it is on my YouTube channel. John, Bald John, who's sometimes on the channel, he also asked him a question. He asked him, should vegans have children? And I asked him, what are the arguments for it being a good thing to create happy lives, basically? Although I asked it in the context of chicken farming. Now, yeah, you can see those videos on my channel and make what you will of his answers. But yeah, it was interesting to ask him that. I think he leans on the pronatalist side, but recognizes that it isn't settled. Like, he doesn't think that there's a solid answer either way as to whether it's good or neutral to create happy lives. And he often cites the work of Derek Parfit, etc. So yeah, that was an interesting one to be able to ask him a question myself. And yeah, so let's see what he has to say in this clip. I imagine he's probably going to say the same sort of thing, but we will see.
Yes, it seems that this is a very...
let me take off that. Okay, now.
Very important question for utilitarians, how they view, say, the value or the disvalue of human extinction. Because some hedonists, like Epicurus, for example, would say that, of course, if at some point all humans died, there would be no joy, but there would be no suffering either. There would be no one to miss out on this. While, so it seems he has, kind of, perhaps Epicurus and David Benatar as well, would hold the extreme on the one side, while Toby Ord...
So Benatar has been mentioned. And actually on that, there's this... what do you call it? There's this journal that Peter Singer co-runs called the Journal of Controversial Ideas, and I'm pretty sure David Benatar is involved in some way in that. I think he's like on some sort of board related to it or something. So I wouldn't be surprised if Peter Singer and David Benatar have maybe met at some point. I know that David Benatar did a response to Peter Singer's famous paper Famine, Affluence and Morality. David Benatar's one was called Famine, Affluence and Procreation, I think. And I was also going to say something else about the connection between those two, but I can't remember it. But yeah, let's keep going.
Seems to hold this very strong, what one might call the deprivationist account, where there is still someone who misses out on this. Do you side more towards one view than the other here?
Yeah, let me just say, I think there's two different things going on here that might be worth separating. One is whether you are an optimist or a pessimist about human life as it is now. Right? So you mentioned David Benatar. So David Benatar...
So it looks like he is familiar then, if he's going to talk about him. Sentient Soyboy asked, have Singer and Benatar ever had a debate or discussion? That would be interesting. I don't think they have, but I also agree that would be very interesting. I don't know of any way that I could contribute to setting something like that up, but if there is a way, I would definitely get involved in setting that up. But yeah, I think that would be a cool thing to see as well.
believes, if I understand.
So he's making the distinction here of like identifying the character of how life is once we exist, and you can have a pessimistic or optimistic evaluation of that. But then there's the separate or linked but also separate issue of whether lives are worth starting, basically.
Correctly, that life on the whole is bad already now. This, if I understand him correctly, that life on the whole is bad already now. That is, that even for each of us, our lives have more negative things in them, more suffering than they...
So Go Vegan asks, is Claire Mann an antinatalist? I don't know where that question came from, but so I've actually spoken to Claire Mann about antinatalism before. When John and myself were organising the conference last year, we actually wanted to get Claire Mann on to be part of that conference. and I had a call with her and spoke to her about the conference, about antinatalism, and she went away and she spoke about. She went away and she thought about it and stuff. And I mean, it was a private call, and it was also a while ago, so I won't say, you know, all the specific details. But she has thought about it as a topic. I don't know how deeply. I don't know if she's thought about it since. And she found it very interesting. And I don't think she'd gotten to the point where she wanted to make a decision as to whether she is an antinatalist or believes in antinatalism or not at that point in time. I think she wanted to consider it more. I don't know if she has considered it more, but she's aware of it anyway. She's spoken to me. I've spoken to her about it, but it was just a one-on-one private call. But yeah, seems like a very nice woman. Appreciate the work she's done for vegan, for the vegan space and stuff. I'm still yet to actually read her book Vistopia, and I do want to read that. But yeah, I appreciate her work and stuff like that. Cool. Okay, let's continue.
To happiness. So if that's so, and if that's likely to continue to be so, and Benatar thinks it is, then it wouldn't be a good thing for our species to continue. Really, it would be best if we all stopped having children so that the species doesn't continue. And that's true whether you're focused on people who are existing already or...
I think that's true, but I also think it's true that even if you're quite optimistic about the state of life, that doesn't mean that you necessarily think it's a good thing for the human species to continue. Like, let's say that all lives we create go very well, right? But even if life goes very well, it's still going to contain some harm. And it's also a life going very well. There's also the whole deal of, like, if someone's really enjoyed their life, are they going to want to die? Probably not. So, you know, death will still be a harm to them, or it will sort of cut short, you know, desires and you know, preferences they have. So, you know, just because lives can go very well and you're optimistic about that, you sort of perceive it in that way, doesn't mean they're perfect. So there's that reason why you wouldn't create them, you know. But there's also the thing that even if lives are going and the lives you start now go very well, and you think that is a reason that counts in favor of creating them, which obviously an antinatalist probably wouldn't. Even if that's the case now, it's not guaranteed to stay that way, right? Antinatalists often get asked, you know, oh, what if there was no suffering? What if the world was free of suffering and it was amazing? It was a utopia. I mean, in my eyes, even if the world was like that, that wouldn't be a reason to create someone. It would just be good that since people are going to come into existence, the world is going to be like that. So yeah, I wouldn't see it as a reason to create them. And I would still think there are reasons not to create them, because even if everyone's living in a utopia, utopias aren't guaranteed to stay forever, right? Utopias, especially up until this point in history, are a very elusive thing, right? A lot of people chase them and commit mass atrocities, you know, on the road to getting to them, never seem to get to them. And even if you get to a utopia, which these natalists are appealing to, it's not guaranteed that it's going to stay that way. Do you get what I mean? So, yeah, I am not a fan of that line of reasoning. And even if you're an optimist, I still think, as I've said, there are reasons to be an antinatalist. Maybe I'll make a video about that. I'll have to see. But anyway, let's go back to Peter Singer.
People who will exist. So that's one question. And on that, I'm an optimist. It does seem to me that life for most humans now, and for many non-humans, although it's a bit more debatable with some non-human animals perhaps, but that life is on the whole positive rather than negative. There's more happiness or well-being than there is suffering. The other question is...
I'd like to understand why he thinks that, like why he thinks there are many lives that have, on the whole, more well-being than suffering, or more fulfilled desires than unfulfilled desires, all of this sort of stuff. That'd be interesting to hear his case, because obviously David Benatar has laid out quite like a, you know, a comprehensive case for why he doesn't think that. He's got a whole chapter in his book about it. He's written articles about it, this sort of stuff. So like I kind of understand that, and I also just like, maybe I didn't before, but now my natural disposition is to understand life in that way. But it'd be interesting to understand why he thinks that, because, and obviously I'm going to be biased now. You know, now I am biased towards the pessimistic side. But I really can't see how someone would, apart from if they're looking at it in a very idealized, broad stroke way, I really can't see how someone can understand life in like an optimistic way, like and for that to be accurate. I mean, I can understand it to a degree. I can, yeah, but if someone was, yeah, really seriously thought about it and took into consideration all the things that, for example, Benatar says, I can't see what they would cling to as a counter argument. So it'd be really interesting to hear from someone like Peter Singer why he thinks that. Yeah. Anna says, I was convinced by antinatalist arguments pretty quickly since it made so much sense to me. Why do you think so many people who are great thinkers don't find it as obvious as some of us? I think even though people can be great thinkers, there are two things going on here, right? Or maybe there aren't two things. But anyway, I'm going to start by talking about, there's this thing called like the halo effect, where just because someone is a really good thinker in one respect doesn't mean they are. So the halo effect is if someone is very competent or knowledgeable about one specific thing, people perceive them as being knowledgeable or competent about other things as well. So you get this a lot with, like, you know, if someone is a historian, then people will start to ask their opinion on XYZ issues as well, that they actually don't have any expertise in. And you see this all the time in the intellectual sphere, in the political commentary sphere, in all this sort of stuff, you know. A classic example, for example, is like Jordan Peterson. Like Jordan Peterson has, he was a clinician, right? And he was I'm gonna get this wrong now, but I think he was a psychiatrist, and so he's clearly going to have expertise in that field. But he talks about all sorts of stuff now, and he says some absolute crazy stuff on a load of things, right? So it's like he's a good example, and there are many other good examples on both the left and the right political, you know, side of the spectrum, in all spheres of life. This thing called the halo effect of like someone's competent at one thing, but and that means that people perceive them as being confident at a range of other things. So I think this plays into what you're saying, Hannah, in that there are people who are seen as great thinkers, and great people because they've made their name from being very competent at a specific thing or in a specific discipline. And we expect that because they're very good at this specific thing, or maybe a sort of category of things, that they're necessarily going to be competent in other things as well. And it's just not the case. You see this with a whole range of things. I mean, you see Sam Harris is a good example. Sam Harris, clearly a very intelligent, competent guy, in a range of things. But you ask him about veganism, and he just comes out with the most inane shit that you would hear from some like person on the street who's never thought about this before. And Sam Harris is like, he's going to have a pretty high IQ. He's got loads of resources at his disposal. He's got like large platforms. So he talks to a lot of intelligent people. He's clearly very intelligent himself, all this sort of stuff. And yet he comes out with this dog shit on certain topics. So yeah, I've kind of learned to not to put too much faith in, you know, in specific people maintaining a level of like agreement with how I see the world, or I'm not always going to. They're not always going to live up to the standards that I impose on them, basically. So, and I think we should all, you know, sort of take that approach to the people that we see as great thinkers, because we are ultimately just going to be let down. It's also like the thing of like never meet your heroes. But anyway, let's continue.
Would it matter if no more beings were to come into existence? So
thanks for joining the stream and the chat, Xenocrates. And I'll see you next time.
There's nobody who misses out. This is the Epicurean point. There's nobody who's, you know, waiting there in limbo thinking, oh, damn, now I'm never going to get born. You know, that's obviously nonsense. So that's not what we ought to worry about. But should we worry about the fact that that there will not be more beings who will have rich, fulfilling, happy lives? And here I think, yes, we should. And one brief argument as to why we should is think of the negative case. Think of a couple who are told by a genetic counsellor that if they have a child, this child will suffer from a genetic disease that will cause the child to suffer horribly for, let's say, a year and then die. And there's no cure, no treatment. But suppose the woman says, oh, never mind, you know, I'd like to experience being pregnant and I want to have my own child. And
this is interesting. So I think what he's going to say is he's going to make the argument for like symmetry, basically, right? So obviously Benatar puts forward the axiological asymmetry. But what Peter Singer's going to probably say here, I assume, is he's going to say, well, we see it as bad to add an additional suffering person, so why would we not see it as good to add an additional happy person? And it may just again come down to a value difference. Like if him and Benatar were to sit in a room, they would have the same set of facts. But Benatar would say, it's just clear to me and my values that there's an asymmetry here, that it is bad to create that person who is going to suffer, but it's not necessarily good to create the person who will have a good life, because if you didn't create them, there wouldn't be anyone to lose out from that. And yeah, and Singer will probably just say, well, that's not where my intuitions lead me. That's not what my values say. My values say, if we're going to have to be symmetrical here, if we say it's bad to create the suffering child, then it has to be good to create the child who's going to have a happy life. And maybe there is no way to really fundamentally show who's right and who's wrong. It may just be a value difference. One approach you can take is looking at the consequences of implementing those values, or the like the implications. Then, you know, if I assume maybe what David Benatar would say to Peter Singer if they were to have a conversation, is he would present a range of, well, he'd maybe do a couple of things. He'd present a range of implications and say, Peter, if you accept the symmetrical approach, you're going to have to sign off on these things. Do you sign off on those things? Another thing he could say is, and Benatar does it in his book, is say there's a range of ethical issues in population ethics that are yet unsolved, and my asymmetry seems to solve them, you know, sort of remove them as problems. So clearly there's something going on here. There's something of value in this asymmetry, given that it doesn't lead to the same problems in population ethics as your symmetrical view does, like the repugnant conclusion, and there's a few others. So those could be two approaches, and I'd be it would be so interesting to see those two sit down. Yeah, I don't know how, lay people like us could bring that about, but yeah, if anyone has any ideas, email me.
Well, I don't really care whether my child suffers or not. I just want to have the experience of that. I think we would think that was a really horrible thing to do.
Cheers for joining, Sentient Soy Boy. See you next time.
Inflict a year of suffering on a child when you don't have to get pregnant, don't have to have that child. So if that's a bad thing, you know, if we're saying now, even though the child doesn't exist now, we're saying you should not go ahead with this, because if you do, there will be a future child who will be miserable, and that will be bad. Then it's hard to see why we shouldn't also say, if you have good reason for thinking that your child is likely to be happy, let's say you're a couple who live in an affluent, secure country, you're by temperament, you're people who are happy with life, positive rather than depressed, and you know that you have genes that will pass this on to your child. So your child is very likely to have a good, happy life. If it's a bad thing to bring the miserable child in the world, I'm inclined to say it's a good thing to bring the happy child into the world. Again, other things being equal, right? Of course, maybe the world is overpopulated and it's going to be bad for other people to have more children. But I'm assuming here we're talking about a situation in which...
What a recommended video. Bestiality and that thing I'm not going to say in case YouTube doesn't like it, but I mean, I've already said bestiality.
That isn't the case. We're just talking about it from the point of view of the future child.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think, like with that one, it may just come down to a value difference, but at the same time, you can take those approaches that I just spoke about, of talking about the implications and also the problems in population ethics that the two sort of address or cause. And yeah, Anna says a happy child can turn into a miserable child really quickly. Exactly, yeah. So there's obviously the whole like risk, uncertainty sort of side of things as well, which they didn't address in that video. So this next video, and I think actually I'm going to do this as the last one. No, I'm not. There was the Jordan Peterson one that we were going to do as well, wasn't there? So what we're going to do is the next one we are going to do is going to be boom, this one. So this is a video by a vegan YouTuber, I think called World of Vegan. And obviously she's having a child, probably very soon by the looks of it. Although this video is from a few years ago, so she would have had the child by now. And she's making this video about, I did watch this, but ages ago. And I think what it's about is it's two things. She's sort of talking about should vegans have children, and she's also talking about her experience of being pregnant and having a child in the vegan sphere and like the reactions people have had and stuff. So yeah, it'd be interesting to hear what she says. So yeah, let's get into it. Before we start, Robert Watkins has joined the chat. Welcome, Robert. So let's continue.
Hello, everybody, from me and the bump here. I have to head out in 15 minutes for what might be my last OBGYN.
And actually, interestingly, I'd never come across this woman, and apart from this video. So maybe she's like an OG, old school vegan YouTuber. But yeah, I'd never come across her before. And she's like not a small channel. I think she has like 100,000 subs. I don't know if she still uploads, actually. I'll have to look into that.
Appointment, because I'm almost 39 weeks and baby's coming anytime now. But before I go, while I'm just here and there's light and the camera's set up, I'm trying to film as much as I can because I know filming is going to get so much harder very soon when this guy appears. So in this video, I want to talk about something that has actually been like the most emotional thing I've dealt with in pregnancy. Maybe that's not true. The most emotional thing relating to vegan pregnancy. And that is like this concept of antinatalism. You may or may not know what that means. It's basically the idea of being opposed to people having children. It's kind of like with spay and neuter. Like if you are opposed to breeding dogs and cats because there's too many dogs and cats in the world. There are too many humans in the world. So logically, you can apply the similar concept to human beings. And it's a concept I'm really familiar with because it is something that I've felt since high school. I actually remember the time I was in biology class and my biology teacher showed a film about human beings and the population on Earth and how we're like just exploding and destroying the planet, and just like human beings are unchecked and out of control. Like the human population is growing so fast. It is not sustainable. And so back in my high school days, when I saw that, I thought, oh my gosh, I do not want to bring a kid into the world. I don't want to have my own children. I'll adopt if I'm ever going to have a baby. And I don't want to contribute to more consumption and human beings on the planet. So I get it. I totally get it. And that is a very earth compassion.
Do you think she's maybe going to be one of the people who, like, you know, when she was younger, she thought the way that she's talking about now, and then she got to a certain age and, you know, FOMO or hormones or etc., because the way she's speaking, I'm kind of getting the vibe that it's going to be one of those cases. And in the book I've been reading at the moment, they're actually talking about that narrative in society on how, you know, especially for women, like there's this narrative of like, you know, once you get to a certain age, people start to ask you the question more, or they start to tell you, you know, you're going to miss out, and you know, your biological clock is ticking and stuff. So I wonder if she experienced all that, and that sort of induced this this want to have a child in her. I don't know, but yeah, I've often found, like, when I've listened to people who have had a child and but they were previously skeptical of procreation or didn't want to procreate, it tends to have been that they did like they either got into a relationship and they, you know, their partner wanted to have a child, or they got to a certain age and they then just changed their mind because of one of the things that I've just spoken about, and they kind of try to rationalize it, but you can kind of see through it, and like you're kind of like post hoc trying to come up with something, but actually at the end of the day, you just got to a situation where you wanted to have a kid and you did it because you wanted to. But yeah, anyway, let's see. Let's not assume. Let's see what she says.
View. It's a very conscious and beautiful way of thinking. So I do want to say that. And for anyone out there, I was adopted as a baby, so I would not have the life I have today if I had not been adopted by family. And my family, my amazing family, I'm extremely pro-adoption. I am also pro-abortion, pro-choice, pro-choice. I think we should have the choice of what to do with our bodies, but that also bringing an unwanted child into the world is very rarely the best situation. And there's a lot of them already here that need good families and homes, so instead we should focus there. All of that said, I obviously am here carrying a baby in my belly. And how I got here mentally and psychologically, I figured I'd talk a little bit about today, because it's something that if you are someone who dedicates your entire life, I really feel that I dedicate my life to making the world a better place, a kinder place, to reducing suffering, mainly to reducing suffering. That's what I care about the most. And so
I wonder if her child remained vegan, because I'm assuming she raised her kid vegan. But you know what's interesting is, so it was National Animal Rights Day recently, and I was in Bournemouth at the National Animal Rights demonstration there, and there was a part where we had to sort of like line up in rows on this sort of stepped rock thing, and I was stood behind these three women. Two of them I'd say were about middle-aged, and then there was another woman who was like more elderly, but not like ancient. And I wasn't involved in their conversation at all, but I was stood right behind them and I had to stay there because it was part of the formation. And they started talking, and they were talking about their kids. And I assume the two middle-aged women, their kids were like younger, but the more elderly lady, maybe her kids, you know, were sort of a bit older. Maybe they were in their like 30s or something. And they were talking about their kids, and they were talking about how, you know, they, you know, tried, you know, they were talking like quite, you know, positively about having children. Because basically what had just happened was there was a photo of there were kids at this National Animal Rights Day, and all of the kids were asked to go in a group, and then the photographer took a photo of just the children with their signs and stuff like that. And that then sparked the conversation in the women, how they were saying, you know, it's really nice to see kids here, and it's really nice that they're getting involved and they're going to be carrying the message on and stuff like this. And then the conversation started to change, and it was really interesting because they then started, none of those children were their own children, and they then started to talk about their own children, and they were asking each other about their own children, about how it was like raising them vegan and stuff. And they were all like saying stuff and blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, where's this conversation going? And you know, it felt like there was like some sort of, I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like there was kind of some like unsaid thing. And then one of them said, oh yeah, but you know, it's kind of, you can't really control what your children do and blah, blah, blah. And I thought, okay, I kind of know where this is going now. And then one of them said, yeah, so my child, you know, they didn't stay vegan. You know, if they go to friends' houses and stuff, they eat animals and stuff like that. And then it came out that was actually the case for all of their children. So they'd initially raised all of their children vegan, but when, you know, you can't control your children 100% all of the time. So when their children started to be a bit more like autonomous, make their own decisions, go elsewhere, they said that all of them said that their children had not maintained veganism. And that was kind of interesting because I was like, you know, okay. Sad, but, you know, like, I have been telling people, not that I know these women, obviously, I haven't spoken to them. But, yeah, so then they were talking about that. And then one of them kind of mentioned, like, the state of the world and how it's a really crazy place. And then one of them said, yeah, I think it was the elderly lady said, if I had my time again, I actually question whether I would have children or not. And then all three of them basically agreed on that. They were all like, yeah, you know, looking back on it, I actually don't know if it was the best thing to do. I don't think any of them said, like, I regret having children or anything like that. I can't really remember what they did say, like, word for word. But they were definitely sort of airing this feeling of like, yeah, it probably wasn't the best thing to do. Like, if I had my time again, I wouldn't do it. And I found that really interesting. I was like, these people standing in front of me are probably some of the most compassionate people in the world, because they are standing outside of the mainstream of society, something that will get you a lot of shit. They're going on demonstrations, so they're not just holding the opinion, but they're doing something about it, you know? And yeah, it's just a testament to how you can't control your child. You know, you don't know how they're going to end up. And yeah, people take this risk, and some children will stay vegan. That's not to say that it's then okay to create them, but it's just that, yeah, some of them will. But there's also those other ones that won't. And I think often in the vegan community, we get overexposed to the children who do stay vegan. So we have a more optimistic outlook on it, because the children who we're going to be exposed to in the animal rights movement are obviously going to be the children who did stay vegan. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in the animal rights movement. All of the children who were born, raised vegan, and then decided not to be, are not going to be coming to animal rights demonstrations. So we're not going to be exposed to them. We're not going to see them. They're kind of like a silent, unnoticed thing, whatever. So yeah, I just found that interesting. I just thought I'd share it. But anyway, let's get back to World of Vegan and see what she's saying.
How did I get from the point where I did not want kids because I didn't want to harm the planet to the point where I'm now carrying a baby? And multiple things. I've kind of, my viewpoints have evolved a lot about.
She kind of seems like nervous in this video, and I can kind of understand that because she's obviously making a video with the understanding that vegans are going to see it, and no matter how, you know, positively vegans see themselves, including myself, there are still a lot of dicks that are vegan, and vegans can be very tribal and all of this sort of stuff. So I can understand why, especially like the position she's in, the fact that she, you know, she can't go back on it now. Like, she's very heavily pregnant. And it's like she knows that there is going to be a section of the vegan world that is going to give her shit for this. So I can understand why she is nervous. And I kind of empathize with her in that way a bit. But yeah, let's see what she says.
What's effective and about the idea of perfection and being a martyr. I used to think sacrifice came hand in hand with being a good person. If you were going to do the greatest good in the world, you should work with nonprofits. You shouldn't make very much money. You should live very frugally. You should not take a lot for yourself and give most of what you get. And that you should sacrifice things like the want to have a child or whatever if it's not going to be in the best interest of planet Earth. And I think that was a beautiful perspective. But I also think, and have learned over the years, that being a martyr is not necessarily the best way to make massive change in the world, and that you really never know if the sacrifices you're making are making a bigger impact or a smaller impact, better or a worse impact than.
So I think maybe she's coming at it more from an environmental point of view, because I think what she's basically saying here is that, like, her foregoing having a child is going to be a sacrifice to her, and she doesn't think that she has to make that sacrifice to be the sort of person she wants to be, i.e. like what she said, like a good person. And it seems like she's coming at it from like the environmental point of view, rather than like thinking about it philanthropically, about like what is this going to mean for the person I create.
Other paths you could have taken. For example, you could decide never to have a kid yourself and then go about your life being vegan, and that's that. You never contributed a kid. Or you could decide to have a kid, donate X amount of money, $500, $1,000, $2,000, whatever amount of money it takes, Planned Parenthood, to prevent an unwanted teen pregnancy by providing birth control resources or something like that. And then have a kid yourself who's wanted, loved, raised compassionately, carries on the compassionate genes that you hold within yourself, and have still prevented a birth. Either way, you're reducing one human being from the population, but one took a small action of a gift of money and a great organization, and the other took giving up something that is going to impact.
I don't quite get what she means there, because if you donate money to an organization and prevent one human from coming into existence, but then you create a human, you haven't changed the sum total. I don't quite get what she means.
Your entire life. So, or like giving up something that you may want.
So I think basically what she's saying is she just didn't want to. I think it was just a selfish thing, right? Like, I think she's trying to put like a gloss on it, but it's basically just she didn't want to give up having a kid because she wants to have a kid, and she wasn't willing to not do that. I think is basically, I think in a roundabout way is basically what she's saying.
In your life. So there's multiple paths to get to the same end impact. And so what seems logically like, if I want to help control the human population, the best thing I can do is not contribute to it. But that's not actually true, right? Like, you could not be vegan, but you could turn 1,000 people vegan.
I think she's kind of thinking about it on a species level, you know, like talking about not contributing to the human population. Yeah, I don't think she's actually really like speaking about antinatalism. I don't think she has a full grasp on what it is.
And that is going to make a bigger impact than being vegan yourself. And the same thing when you're thinking about being a parent. When you step into parenthood, there are so many elements of that you will be influencing those around you who are also parents. So if all the parents are using disposable diapers and you step into this and are using cloth diapers and they're like, huh, really? I'm going to try that for my next kid. That's
But you can do that without having a kid. I don't understand. Like, just start a company that does cloth diapers and go to like mother conventions or whatever, or, you know, mothers groups, sell them there.
really working out great. Oh, cool. And then you spread this different, more conscious style of parenting among so many future generations and parents. So there's those things, like there's the impact that you make through your choices and through the path of life that you take can be really, really great. And then I also have had a little bit of a unique perspective in life with being adopted, because all growing up I thought that it was nurture over nature. I thought I was who I was because of my parents, because of how I was raised. And since finding my biological mother a decade ago, my biological father 2 years ago, my perspective on that really changed. I saw so much of myself, and not just like what I look like or how I act or whatever, but the deep sense of compassion, like respect for the earth, love for animals, ways of just like compassion. It made me believe that compassion is genetic, that there's an element of compassion that can be in genes. And so if every vegan person decides not to have kids, we're self-selecting out of the population the most compassionate genes that exist. We're taking the most like kind, conscious, willing to sacrifice for the greater humanity people.
But even if this was true, like, if there's some sort of like compassion gene, it's not just on off, right? Like, if you want to spread compassion, using your genes is a massively inefficient way of doing that. Like, you can communicate a compassionate message to many, many more people via memes, like just educating people, right? Like, it's not like vegans are compassionate and everyone else is just some callous arsehole, right? Like, a lot of people are maybe just unaware, they just haven't heard, or maybe their compassion just needs to be sort of brought to the surface in some way, you know? There are some people who can be very bigoted and then they change their mind through some experience. For example, like Daryl Davis is a very famous example. He's a black guy and he, you know, he went into the KKK and befriended loads of them. You know, he didn't like demonize them as many people do. And obviously I understand why people demonize them. But he went and made friends with a bunch of them. And then like 200 of them, derobed, I think it's called. And yeah, you could say like those people in the KKK were clearly not very compassionate people, at least seemingly, because they're, they're essentially drawing moral consideration along racial lines. But someone like Daryl Davis was able to provide like an experience for them that meant that their, I don't know if you would use the word compassion, but their sort of, their ethic was changed. I guess you could maybe refer to it as compassion. Like their ethic was changed, their understanding was changed, and they were able to become better people, basically. So yeah, like genes may play a part of it. To be honest, they probably do. You know, genes play a part of like many of the aspects of who we are. You know, physically, mentally, our temperaments, all this sort of stuff. So yeah, I have no doubt that genes play a part. It's just like, how significant a part do they play, and is that significant a strong enough case to counteract all the other considerations, right? Of like, you're going to be imposing the suffering, you're going to be imposing the death, but also like they may be on average more compassionate than other people's children, but that doesn't mean they're guaranteed to be vegan or stay vegan, right? So it's like, let's say, for sake of argument, someone who is part of the general population, like me, take me as an example. So I was like born to two carnist parents. They still are now. And I became vegan. So let's say, for the sake of argument, there was like a 1 in 2, 1 in 3 chance that I would become vegan over my lifetime. And if I had a child, if I created a child with a partner who was also vegan, then let's say our child had a 8 in 10 chance of like remain. Obviously, we would have raised them vegan, but like 8 in 10 chance of them like staying vegan. That's obviously like a significant increase, but does that warrant us creating them? One, because obviously, you know, we're imposing suffering and ultimately death on them as well. But also, like, there's still that 2 in 10 chance that they will be, they won't be vegan. And it's essentially, you're running a 20% chance in this, obviously the actual numbers in reality will be different. I don't know what they are, or even if you could put a number on it in reality. But in this thought experiment, like, there's a 20% chance that I'm essentially creating like a serial killer. Those odds don't seem that good. 20%, like that seems to me, if I could just create a serial killer out of nothing. I mean, if there was a 20% chance that I would create a serial killer out of nothing, yeah, those don't seem like amazing odds to me, when I could just go down the road of spreading memes, education, this sort of stuff, influencing people who already exist. There's not a risk of me creating new carnists. There would already just be a sea of carnists there, and I would just be like potentially converting them. But anyway, let's continue and see what she says.
And the genes that create those people, and we're making them not continue on. And that thought is a little scary to me. It doesn't mean that we should all go out trying to have tons of kids, because I could birth a sociopath or a psychopath or someone, you never know who you're going to bring into the world, for sure. But based on my experience, I have found that there is a lot to genetics that determines the compassion that is innate within me. And I'm eager to see if that shines through in this little man. But I really think it will, because Dan has it too, and it's like, yeah, I don't know. I'm curious to see. But then beyond that, this idea of having to be perfect.
There's obviously also the case of like, well, not the case, but there's also obviously the angle of like obviously she's going to think this, like, first of all, everyone thinks their kid's going to be the Messiah and like better than everyone else's kid. But also it's like, she can't go back now, so she's probably got she's got like a psychological inclination, or I don't know if that's the best way to put it, of like wanting to rationalize it. And I'm not saying she's wrong, maybe her kid will be like the next Earthling Ed, like, who knows? But yeah, it's like, clearly she's got a motivation to think this way.
Every single element of every part of your life is no way to live. And it's honestly not going to make the world change. Like, you're not going to be a happy, inspiring person who is leading a positive example that other people want to follow.
We have a super chat from Wise Man. Much appreciated, Wise Man. Thank you so much. And thank you for your ones in the last stream. I've also seen that there's been a bunch of messages, so I'll go back through the chat. I haven't been keeping up with it. And Wiseman says, hey, thanks for the discussion on my long drive. Oh, right. You're on a drive. No worries. Thank you for tuning in and choosing to be here whilst you're on your long drive. Okay, we've still got a bit of time to go, so I'll go through. Ragsy is in the chat. Welcome to Ragsy. David's in the chat. What does David say? To be fair, though, Lawrence, look how much bloody effort goes into trying to get people to be compassionate to animals. I was in like, that's like, as in like the spreading memes is also difficult. Yeah. I mean, spreading memes will be difficult. Maybe that also isn't the way to go. Maybe the way to go is technology or systems change. I mean, like, yeah, ultimately, I don't know what will bring about animal liberation. But yeah, the point I was making was, even if it is more likely that two vegans creating a child will produce another vegan or I don't even know if it would.
We bring children in this world and we raise them to be warriors against evil.
Sorry, I'll get to that super chat in a second. Where was I? Yeah, so I don't think that. So the point she isn't making is that she's creating another vegan, because I don't think the point is, oh, I'm creating a vegan. It's specifically that I'm creating like an activist who's going to make the world a better place. Or maybe she's kind of saying like, you know, creating a vegan itself just passively sort of makes the world a better place, because obviously creating a new vegan isn't replacing a meat eater or whatever. But the point I was making was, even if creating a new vegan or create two vegans creating a new child, it's more likely that child will be a vegan and an animal rights activist than if two non-vegan, people like my parents create a child, and the chances of that child becoming vegan and being an animal rights activist. What I wasn't saying that it's more likely that you can spread it via memes rather than genes. There may be a case that genes may be more efficient, although I'm skeptical of that, because it's like you'd have to have a hell of a lot of kids to keep up with the amount of vegans that are being produced via memes and education. Although that may sway later as there are more vegans, we'll produce more vegan children. Is that differential enough of a justification to justify procreation, when we know we have, even if we assume, and we don't know for certain now, but even if we assume the alternatives are less effective, that's not the only thing we need to take into account, obviously. Like when you're creating someone, you can't just look at it through this one lens of how effective an animal rights activist are they going to be. Obviously, it's a whole human being you're creating. You have to look at all the different aspects to it. And obviously also that aspect isn't guaranteed as well, is what I was saying. And then David says, it's like running uphill with a 50 kg backpack and the hill is a treadmill. Yeah, again, well, this is the thing, is like, there's a question as to like, is outreach and convincing individual people, it's like, I don't know if it's ever going to get settled, but it's the old thing of like individual change versus systems change. Like, if it's so hard to create individual vegans, maybe that's telling us that, or creating them via education, maybe that's telling us we should try other things like, we have been trying them, like pressure campaigns or technology and stuff like this. Yeah, I agree. I mean, to be honest, this is why I don't really do street outreach that much anymore, because I just found like I was banging my head against a brick wall. And then David says, your example is good, though. Everyone has the capacity to change. Yeah, exactly. Like, it is like banging our head against a brick wall, but that may just be that we're using the wrong approach in terms of our language, or, the examples we use, or how we frame the conversation and stuff like this. Like, I know Animal Think Tank has been doing research into like what is the best framing and what's the best framing that people are receptive to for presenting animal rights. Like, you know, the compassion side of it, or the virtue side of it, or, you know, respecting them as individuals and this sort of stuff. So maybe like the frame, yeah, but like, yeah, exactly. Like a lot of people, even though they seem like they can't change, will, like the whole Daryl Davis and the KKK. Asia Barsic is in the chat. Welcome to the chat. And then David has a question. Could serial killers ever... Oh, actually, quickly, just because there was a donation, wasn't there? And Tyler has donated with no message, but with a sick... I think that's a sick emoji. But anyway, thank you so much for the support, Tyler. It's really appreciated. David asks, could serial killers ever be positive in the antinatalist worldview? For example, if they only take out people who definitely are going to have kids. I mean, if someone's like a hardcore utilitarian, then maybe they'd think that. But I guess you could say the same thing about like veganism, right? Like, could serial killers be a good thing if they only take out meat eaters? Someone did actually write a paper about that called The Meat Eater Problem, about how I don't think they said it would be good to go and actively kill non-vegans. I personally wouldn't support that. But I think they were making the case of we shouldn't be helping them. Because if we help them, then we're sort of facilitating them live longer and kill more animals. In both cases, like I just think there are certain rules that we should generally adhere to. They're not always perfect, but we should generally adhere to. Like, don't kill others. That includes being vegan, obviously. You know, don't kill others. Don't use them as property. Don't procreate. Like, there will be edge cases of all of these things where you could make an argument that, you know, in like a utilitarian way, it would be better. You know, like, there may be certain types of serial killers that only kill certain types of people, and you could make a case that it's better. And it's like, those are interesting. And it's like, okay, you know, maybe there could be cases like that, but in general, like, these are just things that we you know, there are certain rules that we should follow, and we have like a presumptive duty. It's like with like red traffic lights, right? Like, there are some instances where you can go through a red traffic light and it can be fine, and it could even be that, you know, it could actually make things better because you get somewhere faster and you're able to do something that improves the world or whatever. But in general, we have this rule of don't go through the red light. We have like a presumptive duty not to go through the red light. And we even punish people for doing it because we know in general it's a bad thing to do. It leads to chaos and awful things, even though there will be some cases where someone could speed through a red light and it can actually make things better, or it can be fine. If you get what I mean. So I think it's like that. Like, we should have general rules of like, don't be a serial killer, even if someone's able to make some case of like, you know, some serial killers are good and stuff. I was actually going to mention Dexter. Yeah. And Teza is in the chat as well. Are you organizing antinatalist outreach like Stop Having Kids in London? We do have some. I guess you could say I organize them. I sort of like co-organize them and stuff, but we just kind of do it at Speaker's Corner. There's a place in London called Speaker's Corner that has like a history of debate and free speech and open inquiry and this sort of stuff. So we sort of sometimes go there, and we do hold Stop Having Kids signs, but we're not like an official Stop Having Kids group. We just use their designs. But yeah, we do that. And there's some videos on my channel of us doing that if you'd like to, if you want to see those. And if you're near London, then you can come and join us. We're doing one at the end of this month. Right, and then Kartik is in the chat. Welcome, Kartik. And yeah, I don't know if I don't think Kartik would have a problem with me saying this, but last year at Vegan Campout, Kartik and I met, and he's a top legend. And even is asking about that now. Kartik saying, Lawrence, are you going to organise another antinatalist meetup at Vegan Campout next month? Yes. So, well, first of all, yes, I'll be going to Vegan Campout. So if anyone's watching and is going to Vegan Campout, then put in the chat. I know David is. I know Kartik. Well, I'm assuming Kartik is if he's asking this question. And yeah, I'll be organizing another one. I haven't gotten around to doing it yet, but I'll probably do it like a month before and advertise it a bit. So if anyone is going to Vegan Camp Out and wants to hear about that and be involved in it, send me an email. My email's in the description of the live, and once I've set it up, I can add you to that. Right. Is there anything else I need to respond to in the chat? Okay, I can't see anything else directed at me. If anyone has anything, then please either donate or just make it obvious in some way. Right.
There's a point where sacrifice becomes just depressing to even look at. And so I think tapping in and seeing if you really, really want kids, think about adopting. Or if you really want to have your own kids, like, don't not do it because you think you're creating a better world. Like that, there are so many ways that you can make an impact on the world with your entire life ahead of you, with your little one there with you. And you don't need to make that sacrifice. That's how I feel now.
There's also obviously the side of it of like, so if you're looking at having a kid through the lens of like, I'm, going to make the world a better place by creating this kid or whatever, there is also the whole angle of, the time and money and effort it goes into raising that child, which is a lot, like over like 18 years minimum. That's going to be a lot of time, money, and effort. It seems pretty unlikely to me that you wouldn't be able to use that time, money, and effort elsewhere. Like that's 18 years of time, money, and effort. Obviously, it's much more intense in the early years. It's like a full-time job in the early years, but then obviously in the later years, it tails off. But yeah, overall, that's a lot of time, money, and effort. And for someone to say that them creating that one or maybe two children, well, obviously if it's two, then it's even more time, money, and effort, is going to do more good, if we're looking at it through that way, which I don't think is the only way we should. But if you are, to say that that's going to do more good for animals or whoever than using it elsewhere seems to me to be like they kind of just got to that conclusion because they wanted to. It's like, have you really made a rational assessment of what you can do with this time, money, and effort? And you got to the conclusion that just happened to align with what you wanted to do anyway, which is have a kid. Do you get what I mean? Like, it seems kind of suspicious to me. Like, it seems like if you want to use your life to do good and you're thinking, I can do that by having a kid, that doesn't seem to link up to me. Like, it will depend on the country, but I think in the UK, the estimate I saw is like raising a kid all in all costs like £200,000, I think it was, or maybe it was 250. I can't remember. And then obviously you've got the effort and time on top of that. Like all of that together, it seems to me like you could use it more effectively elsewhere. I don't know, obviously, if we'll ever be able to get like an actual answer to this because it's such a complicated question, but it seems just too convenient to me you've apparently made this assessment and it just happens to line up with what you wanted to do anyway. But anyway.
Of course, the people that are choosing not to have kids, I super, super admire that. And even more so when you're choosing to adopt. That is definitely something that I've considered and I still do consider in the future. I think it's the most...
David has said scroll up to his question. Which question? The only one I saw was the serial killer one, and I answered that. Unless I'm missing one. Maybe if you could repost it, because I can't see it.
Beautiful thing that you can do as a parent is adopt a child. Is like, that's incredible. And yeah, something that's so inspiring, and I so encourage for anyone considering that path. And yes, it is something that I consider as well. But yeah, the hardest part of this pregnancy has been when I hear from the people that I love and respect around me. I guess I won't say love and respect, because it's usually not people that are extremely close to me, but
God, this seems like it's going to get quite personal now. And I can empathize with her, you know, like, whilst I wouldn't do what she's doing, yeah, and you know, I think that she's in the wrong. Like, I can empathize that, like, she's clearly in a vulnerable position right now, and the vegan community and sphere can be a very unwelcoming place to people who have done much lesser things than this, right? So I can empathize with her about, you know, and it can be, yeah, I can empathize with the fact that it may have put strain on her relationships as well, because it's like having a kid is going to take her out of activism, and I'm presuming that she was probably quite heavily involved in activism. Again, I don't know, it's an assumption, I don't really know who she is, and it's like that's going to put strains on her, like, ability to do activism and her relationships with the people that she does activism with. So I can empathize with the situation she's in. I mean, obviously we have to bear in mind that she voluntarily put herself in this situation, but yeah. So David has re-put his question: would you expose it or just be like, hell yeah, or keep it quiet? Oh, okay. I saw the hell yeah and keep it quiet bit, but I didn't see the expose bit. Lawrence, I thought you were saying spread it by memes until just now. Or would you be like, hell yeah, and keep it quiet? I'm honestly not getting what you mean. I don't understand what you mean. Oh, it's deleting your question. Yeah, I mean, that's not me. YouTube's doing that. Maybe if hang on, if I change my filter to all messages, I had a weird filter on. Okay, sorry. I think for some reason there was an auto filter on, so I've now taken that off. So actually, there's probably a bunch of messages that different people have been sending that I haven't seen. So apologies for that, everyone. Okay, I see it now. So if you found out for sure that government was putting chemicals in the water to make people infertile, would you? To be honest, there's probably enough shit in the water that it's probably making people infertile anyway. There was, for anyone that doesn't know, I'll keep it vague, but basically there was an alert in my local area recently that there was some pathogen in the drinking water, in the tap water. So I had to switch to bottled water for a bit, but so anyway, so if you found out for sure that government was putting chemicals in the water to make people infertile, would you expose it or just be like, hell yeah, and keep it quiet?
We bring children in this world, and we raise them to be warriors against
we've got
evil.
A donation, and they haven't put their name publicly, so I won't say who it's from. David, I'll get back to your question, and I will, I promise. But we've just had a donation with a question, so I'm going to replay it, and then actually I won't replay it because the guy says stuff, doesn't he? So I'll just read it out. So first of all, thank you so much for the donation. It's very much appreciated. And this person says, antinatalists are convinced that the only way to prevent suffering is to stop human reproduction. I'll read your whole question, but I don't think that is true. I don't think any antinatalist is saying it's the only way to prevent suffering. I think there are many other ways, obviously. Should they then consequently also be in favor of the separation of ethnic groups, since this is the strictest way to prevent the effects of racism? I don't think so. I think antinatalism is a specific position someone has on one topic, which is procreation, right? Now, obviously, the motivations for them taking that position could translate onto other things, But I think it's, if we just take like procreation and then your example of like other ethnic groups, I think there are some key differences. So the first is that it's not in all cases, but in theory, ethnic groups can mix voluntarily, right? So like no one's being coerced. Obviously, that's not always the situation. Like sometimes there is a mixing of ethnicities where it is coerced, but that's not what I'm talking about. So in theory, like ethnic groups can volunteer, and also we got to remember that like ethnic groups aren't like autonomous. Then it's not like all people of an ethnic group think in the same way and collectively make decisions, right? So it's like people within those ethnic groups can voluntarily elect to mix with other people who are in different ethnic groups, right? So I think there's a difference there, because obviously they're making a decision for themselves. If there is going to be some friction, presumably they can inform themselves in some way about that, or at least they'll experience it and then withdraw. With procreation, obviously, it's one person choosing to impose a certain conditions on someone else, so they can't like elect to do it themselves. Also, someone may have the desire for, you know, a mix with a group of people of different backgrounds and cultures and all this sort of stuff. So it's fulfilling some desire they have. When you create someone, there's no one to desire to come into existence. So I say that's another difference. And there was a third, but it's just slipped my mind. Yes, I was going to say that, yeah, if someone of one ethnic group wants to mix with a person of people of another ethnic group, that if there's friction there, then in theory they can like voluntarily withdraw from that, and it wouldn't have it's so highly dependent on their situation, but at least in theory it doesn't have to have like a high cost to it. But obviously once you create someone, if they don't enjoy the set of conditions you're in, like the only way they can get out of that, like out of existing, is to kill themselves. Obviously that is a very high cost. I don't think any of us, wish other people to kill themselves. So yeah, I would say there's quite a few differences there, but yeah. So I think maybe like the motivation for your question was coming from like antinatalists, take a certain position where they want to prevent suffering. Therefore, they maybe would subscribe to like anything that's going to prevent suffering. I don't think that's true. I think like the prevention of suffering for many people is one like value they hold, and that can be pro-choice people, that can be pro-abortion people, that's the same thing, innit? That can be pro-choice people, it can be pro-life people, it can be all sorts of people can come to their position from a value of wanting to prevent suffering, and they may even come to different opinions from the same value, but they can also value other things, right? Like I value the reduction of suffering, but I also value the ability for people to make their own decisions and like their autonomy, right? So even if there was a world, even if there was like, we were able to institute some government that was massively authoritarian, and overall it, could reduce suffering because it would end some types of crime or whatever, right? In my mind, that's not just like a closed conversation of like, oh, it's preventing suffering, bam, done. Like, I think we still need to weigh up, even though it prevents even though this authoritarian form of government prevents suffering by ending some type of crime, is that trade-off worth it with the fact that we're going to have to be giving up many of our civil liberties, right? So yeah, I think there's and Louis, I did make a mistake. Pro-choice and pro-abortion aren't exactly the same thing, but you get what I mean. I meant like pro-access to abortion. Anyway, I hope I've answered your question sufficiently, and thank you so much for the donation. So going back to David's question, so to remind people, if you found out for sure that the government was putting chemicals in the water to make people infertile, would you expose it or just be like, hell yeah, and keep it quiet? My like general intuition is that I would expose it. And I think there are probably like a few different reasons for that, and I'd have to think about it more, but I think the main reason would be that if there was something happening to me that I wasn't aware of, that the government was doing, and it was doing something counter to a very fundamental thing I would like to do, then I would want someone to tell me about it. But having said that, if the government was putting some sort of chemical in the water that made people allergic to animal products, I actually don't think I would expose that. I'd be like, fucking let the water flow. So yeah, I don't know if I like have different, if I take like a different opinion on those two things of like infertility and like, you know, making people allergic to animal products. I don't really know, but yeah, my intuition says I would expose it, but maybe the better thing would be to not expose it. But I think in the long run, it would be better to expose it, because I think it would probably get found out anyway. Yeah, I'd have to think about it more, but my intuition is I would say I would expose it, but yeah, I'd have to think about it more, because I wouldn't expose it in the vegan case, and I don't know why I have that like difference. Yeah, maybe we can talk about that next time I see you. Okay, cool. All right, I think that's everything in the chat. Okay, let's go back to the pregnant lady.
But hearing from the people around me that basically my baby should not exist, or that stepping into this path is me being a bad person, and I know you can think that and feel.
I think that whole thing of like people saying my baby shouldn't exist is a bit misleading, because that sounds like people are saying that baby there, let's get rid of it. And that's, you know, once the baby's here, obviously give them the best life you can, do what's good for them, all this sort of stuff. What's being said is you shouldn't bring someone into existence. But once they exist, and to be honest, she looks so heavily pregnant and so far along that her baby almost definitely exists in a morally relevant way. Like, I'm assuming, even though the baby isn't born yet, I'm assuming like it's sentient in some way, because she's so far along. So yeah, it's like her baby. Antinatalism kind of isn't it isn't even in the question really anymore, because it's like once someone exists, antinatalism kind of gets left at the door. Now it's like it's other ethical issues that are at play, and antinatalism is about not starting lives. But once the life exists, it's kind of got nothing to say. You know, you have to talk about other things. So it's like, I think we're past the point of antinatalism with her, but obviously she's reflecting on how it's made her feel throughout this process, obviously.
But I'm not sure that that's the best way to go about reducing our population size. Is not about shaming the people who deeply want to be a parent and who follow that path in life. Volunteer for Planned Parenthood, help reduce unwanted pregnancies, which there are so many of. Like, there's so many other things that we can be focusing on.
Yeah, it's crazy. Half of pregnancies worldwide are unintended, which is pretty mental.
Rather than the wanted kids that are brought into the world, if that makes sense. Okay, I could go on this topic for a while. It's definitely something that is emotional for me. It has made me, it's made me cry. It's made me hurt in my heart. It's made me like really just not being able to look down and feel excitement and support and love from those around you with something so significant you're stepping into his life is not easy, but it's something you may experience if you're in a vegan pregnancy. So I just wanted to like share this video. I'm gonna get a little nervous to post this, but I'm going to, because I think it is really important that we talk about these things. I also want to say that I didn't sit down here having planned what I was going to say. I'm days away from giving birth, so I just wanted to like brain dump out here, because it's better to say something than not share anything. So I'm sure you can find loopholes in what I've said or nitpick what I've said, and please feel free on the
Oh, she's fucking got me.
comments. It's all good. But this is just how I'm feeling in this time based on my personal life experience. And now, months later, after being like feeling the pain of processing that perspective, I feel so much better. Like, I feel so excited to be a mom. I've talked to so many other vegan parents and people who are changing the world in bigger ways than almost anyone else I know who have kids, and I've asked them, like, how do you rationalize having children? And they have said to me, like, my children are what inspire me to do my work every day. Like, I want to create the greatest world for them and for all the other future kids, animals, future generations, and the future of the planet. So I think, yeah, I will just leave it there. And to everyone, I have full respect for you and your opinions, whatever they are, and I hope that we can all remain just kind and supportive of each of us on the path that we choose. All right, with that, this was kind of a serious topic, but I felt like it was important. If you guys want to stay tuned for more, you can...
Okay, so I think that's the end of that video. So, yeah, I was gonna maybe do one more, but I think we've been going for like 2.5 or maybe even more hours now. So yeah, we can maybe save that one till next time. Right, so yeah, we'll end that there. Thank you everyone for joining. Thanks for everyone who supported Tyler, Bovine, not Secretions, Wise Man, and obviously the person who supported anonymously as well. But yeah, thank you everyone so much for joining, supporting, watching, sharing your thoughts in the chat. In terms of stuff coming up next, so I've got a live stream scheduled with John later this month, which is on community stuff. I actually don't have any videos like scheduled to post. Actually, that's a lie. I have some shorts that are going to be coming up in the next few days and stuff. But yeah, I've got a bunch of videos that I'm going to be working on, but they just take a bit of time. So yeah, I'm not sure when my uploads are going to be, but there will be some coming soon. But anyway, just a reminder, if you are coming to Vegan Camp Out, then send me an email, because there will be an Antinatalist meetup there. Last time it was quite successful. We had like between 10 and 15 people. And given that like it really wasn't that well advertised, and it was the first ever one, I thought that was pretty good. So yeah, anyway, thank you everyone for joining, and I will see everyone in the next one.